Good morning. We begin with that new state law rolling out. It's called the Community Safety Education Act, supposed to improve trust between police and minorities. But the lawmaker who put it together, State Senator Royce West, says it needs some tweaking. That is one of the topics we're going to ask him about. And joining the questioning, as always, is Bud Kennedy of the Star-Telegram. Senator, good to see you. Bud, thanks for coming in.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Let's start with this new law. Remind people what it includes, Senator, and what needs to be changed on it already.
Okay, what it includes is the following. We have put into the driver's education manual what the behavioral expectations are of police and citizens doing traffic interactions and other interactions. We believe by putting that information in there that it will better equip both police officers and citizens with what is expected of them. Now, again, as I told you, it's a four-leg prong. We're also taking the content and putting it into our schools. We're putting it into the police academies, and we're also putting it into the driver education programs. What's happening now is that the Texas Education Agency, through the State Board of Education, is now promulgating rules for the various school districts, which citizens will have an opportunity to basically respond to. And some of the rules as it relates to what school districts will be required to do starting this fall, 2018-2019, is to design courses between the 9th and 12th grade that students receive this information in terms, as an example, what is it must include information about a person's rights concerning interaction with a peace officer, laws relating to questioning and detention by peace officers, how and where to file a compliment on behalf of a police officer, and also a complaint on behalf of a police officer. And importantly, that you must also, the schools must make certain that on the transcripts of every student, regardless of the color of their skin, that there's something on the transcripts that shows that students have received this information.
Now, we agreed this was something that was needed, but you're saying something needs to be changed. What needs to be changed?
I think that what needs to happen is, we're going to be looking at the complaint process, because we're getting information that it's all over the place in terms of how do I file a complaint in Dallas versus how do I file a complaint in, as an example, I don't know, in Duncanville.
Are they the same? Police officer or
who would file a complaint against who?
Well, again, if a citizen has a complaint, should there be uniform standards throughout the state of Texas of what that complaint process should be based on the various types of complaints that are filed, and should there be a uniform system of investigating those complaints?
And you're talking about a citizen filing complaints against someone in law enforcement?
Or filing a compliment.
Or a compliment.
Right.
We've talked about this bill when it was legislation, the law when it was a bill before. I'm curious, how will you measure success with this new law?
In terms of the reduction of the number of complaints against police officers, and frankly, the increase in the number of complaints. I will also measure it based on making certain that we hopefully see a reduction in the number of, how should I say it, stress situations defined as police shootings of citizens doing traffic interaction, or fights by citizens of police officers doing those types of interactions.
Well, now we know that people are being told how to conduct themselves when stopped. But what is the punishment for police officer? What is the discipline for police officers? Someone might file a complaint with Internal Affairs?
Exactly. Or if Internal Affairs determines that there's criminal action or criminal conduct, then they obviously will send it to the district attorney's office. But what happens, Bud, is this. What we're being told now, anecdotally, is that sometimes people will go to a police department to try to file a complaint, and frankly, they're discouraged. In fact, they're in many instances they run away from filing the complaint for fear of reprisal by the police department. I'm not saying that it's true. That's what we're being told, and we believe that we need to look at that to make certain that that is not the case.
What would be the normal action on any other complaint against an officer? It'd be to go to the district attorney. It'd be to take it to another level. What would it be?
Well, in terms of you hit the nail on the head. The fact is that if you can't get it done through the police department, you need to go to the district attorney's office. But we want to make certain this legislation is the result of law enforcement and civil rights organizations working with me and others in order to make it this particular law. And it's been very collaborative in terms of the rules that are being promulgated through the Texas Education Agency, through the police departments, through their training process. And so I believe that we'll be able to look at the complaint process during this interim, and if it needs to be adjusted, we'll do that.
You think it does, though, it sounds like, right?
Well, based on
what you're hearing.
Based on what we're hearing. Now, and again, what you're hearing and what's fact may very well be different.
Let's shift off to education here, Senator, as well,
Sure.
too. UNT wants to open a new campus in Frisco. You're on the Senate Higher Education Committee, and you have concerns about that. What are they?
Well, I mean, the fact is that if UNT, not the UNT system, UNT wants to open another campus, then obviously in Frisco, they're going to have to make the case for it. What I understand what they want to do is have some extension programs there. And the fact is that we've got to look at whether or not that's a prudent use of taxpayers' dollars, given everything we're doing in higher education, given the limited number of resources that we currently have.
Do you think it is?
Well, I mean, the fact is that I haven't been approached. I would have thought that they would have called me before making that announcement, but they didn't. But I do plan on speaking with them about it.
Well, let's talk about the Democratic ticket.
The Democratic lawsuit?
The Democratic ticket.
I thought you were talking about the lawsuit.
We asked you if there was going to be an African American near the top of the Democratic state ticket, and you said yes. You know, tell me where African Americans find people who look like African Americans to vote for on the Democratic ballot.
Well, I think that, number one, I want to say that I told you also that that Republican lawsuit filed in Dallas County was frivolous, and it was frivolous.
It was dismissed.
It was what?
It was dismissed, which we've talked about in the program as well, too.
I know. But in terms of this particular issue, the fact is that no, there aren't any African Americans on the ticket. And the question is whether or not the candidates that are on the ticket will be able to appeal to the African American base. What that's going to entail is this: they've got to make certain that they do ample outreach like that they haven't done before. What I do see is, and you take for the governor.
The governor came and met with African American pastors in Dallas last week. He's already reaching out to African Americans.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's what the Democrats are going to have to do. But reaching out is one thing. Actually working a plan that's important to African Americans is altogether something different. You can reach out as much as you want to. There are different priorities that we have in the African American community. Education. We can't keep on doing the same old thing. And I've talked to the governor's people about this, and we'll continue to talk to other candidates about it. And those persons that have real plans that involve African American input, African American rollout, will be those persons that I'll support.
You said governor, which one?
I'm going to be supporting Lupe Valdez. She's my constituent.
All right. State Senator Royce West, we appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
You're welcome.